Thank you. That was a very broad-ranging address. Thank you very much. We've got some time for questions. So we've got a couple of roving mics around. So please raise your hand with your question and state who you are before you ask Mr. Shorten a question. While we're waiting for questions, I have a question for you. Yep. You mentioned education as one of the fundamental building blocks of growth. So I'm just wondering, what's your plan for third-generation unemployed who really don't get into education or consider education as something that is valued?
First of all, education needs to be affordable. Higher education and TAFE. Secondly, we need to ensure that one of the propositions we advance is place-based services. Recognise that disadvantage isn't just a health issue or just an education issue or just a housing issue, but it happens in communities. So what we look at doing is providing services which bring all the services together in one postcode or one place. I also think that some of the biggest things which lead to intergenerational disadvantage is the unequal treatment of women. And I think you'll also find that there's one of the big challenges, of course, is family violence. So whilst they're not all exclusive factors and they don't all sit exactly over each other, a government which makes it easier for you to get childcare, which gives greater support to women in particular, not exclusively women, but 95% women, who are in family violence situations, be able to have alternatives. Being able to keep the cost of Medicare down, preserving bulk billing, making sure that we keep the cost of going to TAFE or university down so that people can think it is possible to send their kids there. But also it means having more jobs in the suburbs. I think NBN is a game changer in that it'll allow businesses to set up, not in particular parts of cities, but allow businesses throughout the outer suburbs have an opportunity to bid for contracts and compete. So I think there are a whole heap of things, and of course I mentioned public infrastructure. We need to start building roads and rail again in this country in a big way. It drives jobs, it makes it easier for people from battling backgrounds to get into work, I think. So there's a range of propositions.
The Treasurers spoke about infrastructure yesterday. We had 3 Treasurers on the panel, and they spoke a little bit about infrastructure as well. You mentioned a few things dear to my heart around domestic violence for one, and education with both TAFE and university. I'm curious, in South Australia, given that I am a proud South Australian, in South Australia, one of the things we do quite well there is the women's education program, which actually runs, it's funded by the government and runs for women who have been suffering from domestic violence. So basically, when they get out of that situation and they've escaped somewhere, they can go and do a women's education course at TAFE, and which is funded, which then allows them to then go off on and actually do something else and start to get paid employment. And one of the biggest factors there is that they actually say to us, they bring their first paycheck into TAFE, and they say, this has actually allowed me now to get a job and allowed me to support my family and support my children, and the best thing I've ever done. But it's interesting, it's only actually funded in South Australia. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Oh, I'll have a close look at the program. I should have also mentioned needs-based funding in schools as being a driver of change. But I'll have a look at the South Australian program. Let's be clear, family violence is a tremendous cost to the Australian economy. It's dreadful for, of course, the victims and the families involved. A government, as an economic strategy, the equal treatment of women isn't just an add-on proposition. When you think about the wage gap between men and women on average in Australia, it's about 20%, 80% plays 100%, maybe a little north of 80%. That's the equivalent of women working 2 months, the first 2 months of every year they work for free, because that's the gap. That's ridiculous, isn't it, when you put it that way? But that's exactly what happens. I said earlier, why should a little baby girl, today's the International Day of the Girl Child, why should little girls, even in this country when they're born, start at a disadvantage? It's not that they have the disadvantage, it's the system. Yeah, our participation rates for women in the Australian economy are well below that of men. We don't know what a truly gender equity society looks like because there isn't one in the world, but it'd be good fun to find out, because I think we'd be, a lot more well-off and a lot more prosperous in answering a lot more of the issues.
Definitely. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, Diane.
Bill, thanks very much. That was indeed a wide-ranging address, and your support for gender equity, particularly on today, is really valued. I heard what you said about we don't want to be a nation of part-time jobs, and I heard what you've said about women coming back into the workforce to be more equal. I think we are moving to an environment where jobs are going to fractionate, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about what are the policy settings that will support that fractionation of work and the things that really will allow women to come into the workforce. And of course, I'm asking you to debate childcare versus parental leave type stuff with that question, but I'm sure you worked that out anyway. Oh, and by the way, next time you're in Perth, you need to get my sister-in-law Fiona to cook you some Brussels sprouts.
I like Brussels sprouts. I was just picking a populist image. Damn. I've got nothing against part-time work. But the problem is, if you've only got part-time work and that doesn't help you pay the bills, that's a problem. I think there's nothing finer than full-time jobs. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about manufacturing and blue-collar jobs is, you know, manufacturing didn't pay the minimum wage, but it wasn't paying the best wages. But manufacturing jobs have soaked up people's employment, and they've given people a leg up into the middle class. The ability, when you've got a regular full-time income, you can go to the bank, my friends, and you know, you can engage in getting a loan and you can service it. If you want to send your kids to the local Catholic school, you can. If you want to have a holiday, you probably can. Full-time jobs give you a degree of control over your life, which part-time jobs don't. Now, I get that part-time jobs, in terms of flexibility, sometimes for carers and parents, part-time work's good in between the school bells. I understand also that the nature of some industries that they are seasonal, you know, the peak tourism season or when the crop's got to come off. So, you know, I'm not naive, but somewhere along the line we've been, I think, not being sufficiently open about what jobs we're creating, and I think full-time jobs hit the sweet spot for people in a way which allows us to be a much more stable and prosperous economy. Having said that, how do we get women the opportunity to work and to get a better deal? You know, in no particular order, I can pick certain tests. One is we should have 50% women on boards in government. That's something we can do. And not everyone wants to serve on a board, I get that, but it just sends a signal. My own party's committed to 50% of our representatives in the federal parliament being women. We're above 40% now, which is good. We're doing much better than the other team. And we've done that through affirmative action. I think there's other ways. Childcare, which Diane mentioned, the early years, that's important. If the childcare bill's so high that it's not worth you going to work, well, that's a problem, isn't it? But of course, childcare is not just about minding little ones while you go to work. It's also got to have a quality edge to it in terms of education in their formative years. Pick another area, engineering and maths and science courses at university. At the last election, we had a policy which would say that we would provide 100,000 scholarships, but half of them would go to women to lift the number of women participating in STEM. Family violence, which we've spoken about. I'm a supporter of family violence leave. Not because everyone's going to be inundated with a whole lot of claims for family violence leave, but it's just the worst thing that can happen when you're the victim of violence is that you then lose your job or you then got to move out of your house. You know, it's sort of injury upon injury. So I think there's lots of mechanisms at our disposal. One proposition we looked at for the Commonwealth Public Service is that in the first round of interviews or the first round of applications, you don't put the name of the applicant, you just look at the CV and you can't tell the gender. I think that'll get more people through the first barrier. Maybe it wouldn't, but we want to innovate. I think there's a big case for aged care workers, to pick another group. They're predominantly women. We cannot expect our aged care workforce to keep working at such low wages in such an important part of our economy. There's 300,000 of our fellow Australians in aged care. Aged care now, this is the high needs aged care. It's the place you go. It's your last place you go, really. We're seeing tremendous pressure on staff there, and yet we rely upon women in particular to go into aged care, but the wages are hopeless. So I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things we can do, Diane. I don't see gender equity as being an afterthought. I see it as a fundamental theme of inclusion, just as I see diversity, standing up for immigration, just as I see having a proper safety net, Medicare, super, the minimum wage, penalty rates. You know, it's how you keep a floor. We don't want to become like some first world countries where even if you go to work full time, you're still not above the poverty line. You know, I think we can be smarter than that.
Thank
But
you.
I might have to go. They've got a thing called caucus.
Might just ask Dr. Alan Hawke to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you.